What if the best opportunity home buyers have to negotiate over the next 5 years is happening right now? It sounds like a crazy statement, but today we're going to back it up with real numbers, because almost every housing headline this week is doing the exact same two things. It's trying to scare you, and it's skipping the actual data. So today, we're skipping the headlines and going straight to the numbers.
Here's what we found. Builders are still offering incentives on nearly 2/3 of every home they sell. Resale sellers aren't panic selling either. They're finally becoming willing to negotiate. That's a huge difference, and it's one that almost every headline gets wrong. Rates are still elevated, which is exactly why this opportunity still exists. But here's the part almost nobody is talking about.
Yeah, you're right. No one's talking about it. Markets are expecting the possibility of lower interest rates later this year. That doesn't automatically mean mortgage rates will fall within them, but if mortgage rates do ease, millions of buyers who've been waiting on the sidelines could jump back into the market. And when that happens, builder incentives, they disappear. Seller flexibility, that disappears as well. And this negotiating window we see now begins to close.
So today, we're going to separate the headlines from the math. We'll show you why sellers reducing their asking price isn't the same thing as home values falling, why waiting for lower rates could actually cost you your negotiating power, and the 2 questions you should ask your lender this week to turn all of this from a guess into a decision. Because by the time everyone agrees to it's safe to buy, the negotiating window may already be closing.
So open your phone and read 5 housing headlines this week. You'll see different websites, different writers, and different opinions. But underneath almost every one of them, you'll find the exact same 2 things: fear and very little context. The headline is designed to make you feel like something big is about to happen. But here's the problem. Most of them never show you enough of the data for you to decide if the headline is actually true. That's why we're skipping the opinions today and starting straight with numbers and facts instead.
All right, let's start this with the biggest number that really matters. Existing home sales. Inventory is sitting at about 4.6 months of supply. Now, why does that matter? Because economists generally consider 6 months to be a balanced housing market. Anything below that still favors the sellers. Now, here's the part that almost nobody's talking about. A year ago, the number of homes coming onto the market was growing by nearly 29%. Today, that growth has slowed down to under 2%. Think about that for a second. Everybody was waiting for inventory to flood the market. Instead, that flood is slowing to a trickle.
That's right. You and I heard it all the time. Oh, we're going to get all this inventory and it's going to lower the price. Well, we're still waiting. Now, let's add the second piece to this puzzle. Mortgage rates are still hovering around 6.65 to 6.8%, given where the wind's blowing. At the same time, financial markets are expecting the possibility of 1 or 2 Fed rate cuts before the end of this year. Now, that's important because while the Fed doesn't directly control mortgage rates, expectations like these can influence the bond market that does. The point is simple. Today's market is giving buyers something they rarely get: less competition, while there's still room for rates to improve. That combination doesn't usually last very long.
And that's really the entire point of this episode. If you already know you're going to buy a home sometime over the next 5 years, this could be one of the best negotiating opportunities you'll see during that entire stretch. Not because we think home prices are about to explode, we don't. And not because we're predicting some massive drop in mortgage rates either. We are not. It's because the moment of affordability improves, even a little, more buyers are likely to jump back into the market. More buyers usually means more competition. More competition usually means less negotiating power. That's the window we're talking about. And that's why we think it's worth paying attention right now.
Got about $450 here. Now, how much is this going to cost me?
$450.
Done. He's good.
Let's talk about who's actually sitting on the other side of the table right now, because there are really two different housing markets. One is new construction, the other is existing homes, and they are behaving very differently. Let's start with the builders. Right now, they're offering incentives on nearly 63% of the homes they sell. That's been true for about 16 straight months. About 37% of the builders also cut prices in July by an average of about 6%. Now think about that. What does it tell us? Builders aren't doing that because business is booming. They're doing it because they have inventory to move. And right now, that gives buyers real negotiating power. But that leverage isn't guaranteed to last forever. Builders themselves continue to say one of the biggest reasons buyers are waiting is because they're hoping mortgage rates come down.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot right now, Manley. Now, compare that to someone who's selling a home they've lived in for, say, the past 5 or 10 years. They're probably sitting on a mortgage somewhere around 2 to 3%, aka a unicorn rate. They're not underwater, they're not forced to sell, and they're certainly not giving their house away for free. In fact, many of them have built a tremendous amount of equity over the last several years. So when you hear headlines talking about desperate sellers, that simply is not what the numbers are showing us. But something is changing. They're becoming more willing to negotiate, which is not something we've seen prior, aka a window of opportunity.
And that's where a lot of people get tripped up. Seller concessions showed up in more than 46% of the home sales this year. Price reductions are happening more often too. But don't confuse those two things with falling home values. They are completely different conversations. A price reduction simply means a seller started too high and the market, it pushed back. And then they adjusted to where buyers were willing to engage. That's called negotiation. It's not evidence that home values across the country are collapsing. In fact, the national median home price is still moving higher. Both of those things can be true at the same time because they're measuring two completely different things.
That's right. It's two different things that they're changing the shuffle of the cards, the context. That's the distinction almost nobody makes. Negotiation isn't the same thing as depreciation. One seller adjusting their expectations isn't the same thing as the market losing value. Those are two completely different stories, and unfortunately, a lot of headlines blur them together because it creates a scarier narrative. When you step back and look at the whole picture, builders, they're negotiating because they have inventory to move. Existing homeowners are negotiating because they finally had enough confidence to meet the buyer somewhere in the middle. Neither one points to a housing crash. In fact, the complete opposite. But together, they create a negotiating environment buyers haven't had in quite a while.
And that's exactly why we're calling this a negotiating window. Not because homes are suddenly cheap, not because sellers are desperate, because buyers have leverage. And leverage is something that usually disappears quietly, long before the headlines ever admit it's gone.
It seems the tables have turned.
Okay, so what do we actually do with all of this information? There's an old saying in our industry that you've probably heard before. Marry the house and date the rate. It's overused and overplayed. The problem is most people stop there. Let's talk about what it actually means. The purchase price you negotiate today never changes. It stays. But your mortgage rate might. And if rates fall enough in the future and the numbers make sense, you may have the opportunity to refinance into a lower rate while keeping the price you negotiated today. That's the trade-off. You can negotiate your financing, but you can't renegotiate what you paid for the house.
Now let's be really clear about something. This isn't a blanket recommendation for everyone watching. If you're not planning to buy a home anytime in the next 5 years, this conversation probably isn't for you. But if you already know homeownership is part of your plan, then this is exactly the conversation you want to be part of. Because the question isn't, should I wait for a lower rate? The better question is, what might waiting cost me? If lower rates bring back more buyers into the market, and we believe they probably will, you may save a little on your monthly payment while giving up thousands in negotiation power. That's the trade-off. And that's the math each buyer has to understand today.
That's right. I mean, waiting will definitely cost you. There's a trade-off. There's a reason why the numbers changed. So here's your homework this week. Don't guess. Get real numbers. Sit down with the lender and find out exactly what you can comfortably afford at today's rates. Then ask one more question. If rates improve, at what point does refinancing actually make financial sense? Not can I refinance, but when does the math make refinancing worth it? That's a completely different question, and it's the one most buyers never think to ask.
That's really the point of this episode. We're not trying to convince you to buy a house. We're trying to help you make a better decision, because confidence doesn't come from headlines. It comes from understanding the math. If the numbers tell you wait, then you should wait. If the numbers tell you buying now puts you in a stronger position, you should move forward confidently. Either way, you're making a decision based on facts instead of fear.
Once again, this is rumor control. Here are the facts.
Now let's put some numbers behind everything we've been talking about. Because if you watch the Mortgage 101 podcast every week, these are the numbers that drive everything we've been discussing today. Anthony, where did the market land this week?
Absolutely, Manley. Let's start with the 30-year fixed. It's currently averaging at a 6.66% according to Freddie Mac, with daily pricing hovering right around 6.65%. That's up about 8 basis points from last week at 6.58%. Now, the 10-year Treasury, which historically tracks closest to mortgage pricing, actually slipped 1 basis point this week, and it's sitting around 4.7%. Meanwhile, the 5.5 UMBS coupon, the mortgage bond behind most home loans, that fell about 20 ticks over this week. And remember, when mortgage bond prices fall, mortgage rates generally move higher.
Yeah, Anthony. So here's the takeaway. Mortgage rates moved up just a little this week, even though the Treasury yields were basically flat. That's because mortgage-backed securities weakened. It wasn't a huge move, but it's another reminder why we watch the bond market every single week. Because headlines might tell you one story. If you want to know where the mortgage rates are headed, stop watching the headlines and start watching the bond market.
Well, I believe you may get your headlines, Mr. Ismay.
Okay, so here's the biggest takeaway from today. The headlines are not your strategy, but math is. When you understand what's really happening in the market, you stop reacting to fear and you start making better decisions.
If today's episode made you think a little differently about the housing market, do us a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the Mortgage 101 podcast, and share this episode with that one friend or that Uncle Eddie who's been chirping in your ear to wait for the perfect time to buy. Because sometimes the biggest opportunity isn't a lower rate. It's realizing you had more negotiating power than you thought.
Yeah, and if you're wondering what all this means for your situation, stop guessing. Reach out. Every buyer's situation is different, and every decision deserves real numbers, not just assumptions.
Remember, don't wait for permission from the headlines. Understand the context and let the math tell the story. We'll see you next week.
Girl from the heart of Wisconsin to the waves of Hawaii. Manley and Anthony keep it real, not salesy. Breaking down rates and the truth you need to know with a little soul and a little homegrown flow. It's the Mortgage 101 podcast where real talk meets home at last. Manley's got that Midwest soul. Anthony brings that island roll when the market swings and you don't go fast.